My husband placed his hand over my younger sister's pregnant belly and looked me dead in the eye. "It is a shame your stressful corporate lifestyle ruined your body, Paige," he whispered loud enough for our mother to hear. "Otherwise, this could have been us." He smiled that easy golden boy smile, the one that made everyone in our Utah suburb adore him. I did not scream. I did not throw my champagne in his face. Instead, I smiled back, picked up a heavy manila envelope from the mantel, and handed it to my sister. "Open it, Kelsey," I said gently. "It is a joint gift from Nolan and me." She tore the flap, expecting a check for her nursery. Instead, she pulled out glossy 8x10 photographs of her and my husband kissing on the balcony of a Park City ski cabin, pinned beneath a 50-page transcript of their sordid text messages. Her jaw unhinged. The color vanished from her face. Nolan froze, his hand still resting on the belly that carried the babies he thought were his. "My name is Paige Sanders. For 8 years, I funded my husband's life while he blamed me for our empty nursery. Today, I am taking it all back." Before I tell you exactly how I turned their betrayal into the perfect trap, tell me in the comments how old you are right now listening to this on Sarah Told Stories. Because no matter your age, nobody warns you when your own flesh and blood decides to build a village in the shadows of your marriage. The crystal of my champagne flute chimed a sharp, clear note as I tapped it with a silver spoon. The sound cut through the low hum of chatter, the clinking of porcelain plates, and the soft jazz playing through the hidden ceiling speakers of my pristine Salt Lake City living room. Dozens of faces turned toward me. Aunts, uncles, my parents, and a handful of mutual friends halted their conversations. They looked from the catered spread of miniature quiches to where I stood near the marble fireplace. Sitting in the center of the room, flanked by sage and blush pastel balloons, was Kelsey. She rested in a plush velvet armchair, her hands cradling the prominent curve of her maternity dress. She glowed with the smug satisfaction of a woman who believed she had secured her future. Standing directly behind her chair, radiating forced charm in a designer fleece vest paid for by my salary, was Nolan. He called himself an outdoor adventure consultant. It was a title that served mostly as a shield for his chronic underemployment in a state obsessed with mountain biking and rock climbing. To understand how my sister ended up holding her own execution warrant at her baby shower, you have to rewind exactly 4 months to a Sunday family dinner. That was the night the first boulder dropped. We were sitting around my parents' sprawling oak dining table. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary hung heavy in the air. Nolan and I had struggled with infertility for years. It was a heavy, suffocating cloud over our marriage, one Nolan routinely blamed on my career as a vice president of operations at a major tech firm. He loved to tell my family that my ambition was toxic, that my stress levels were the reason my body failed us. And my family, deeply rooted in traditional values, usually nodded in quiet sympathy. Then Kelsey stood up, tapping her water glass. She was glowing, practically vibrating with excitement. "I am pregnant," she announced, her voice bouncing off the dining room walls. "And it is twins." The table erupted in cheers. My mother gasped, pressing her hands to her cheeks, tears spilling instantly. My father rushed over to pull Kelsey into a crushing hug. But I did not look at Kelsey. My eyes caught a subtle, terrifying movement across the table. Nolan exhaled a sharp, hyper-specific breath of relief. His shoulders dropped. His hand shot out under the table, instinctively brushing the back of Kelsey's chair. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, carrying a weight of shared intimacy that hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. A sick realization twisted in my gut. It was not a suspicion. It was a sudden, chilling clarity. My husband was sleeping with my sister, and those babies were his. Most women would have shattered right there. They would have thrown a glass, screamed across the table, or demanded answers. I did none of those things. The tech sector does not reward emotional outbursts. It rewards strategic execution. I retreated into the analytical mindset that made me an executive. I clapped my hands, stood up, and hugged my sister, breathing in the scent of her expensive vanilla perfume, a perfume I bought her for her birthday. "Congratulations," I whispered against her hair. Her skin was warm, but the blood pumping through my own veins felt like ice. On the drive home that night, Nolan prattled on about how blessed our family is. He drove my luxury SUV, his hands relaxed on the leather steering wheel, blissfully oblivious to the storm brewing in the passenger seat. I stared out the window at the snowy outlines of the Wasatch Mountains against the night sky. I did not argue. I simply smiled, agreeing with his every word, already planning my audit. The moment we walked through our front door, Nolan headed straight for the bedroom, claiming he was exhausted from the social interaction. I waited until I heard the heavy, rhythmic breathing of his deep sleep. Then I walked into my home office, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I did not check his phone. A phone is too obvious. A phone gets scrubbed. Instead, I opened our joint credit card statements and cross-referenced them with his business expense accounts. The quiet clicking of my mouse was the only sound in the dark room. It took me less than 40 minutes to find the first crack in his foundation. Buried under a list of charges for climbing gear and protein supplements was a recurring charge for a specialized prenatal clinic in Park City. The billing name was obscured, listed only under a parent medical conglomerate, but the address matched a high-end boutique facility specializing in twin pregnancies. Nolan had 0 pregnant clients. Nolan had 0 reasons to pay medical bills in Park City. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair, the blue light of the screen reflecting in the dark room. My chest felt hollow, carved out by a betrayal so deep it defied logic. For 8 years, I subsidized this man's life. I paid our mortgage, I funded his business, I endured his constant degrading lectures about my corporate lifestyle ruining my fertility. And all the while, he was using my money to fund a secret family with my own sister. I closed the laptop softly. The tears never came. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. But what I felt was freezing cold. I was not just going to divorce him. I was going to dismantle him, piece by piece. The glowing screen of my laptop cast a harsh blue light across the mahogany desk in my home office. The rest of the house was buried in the heavy silence of 2 a.m. Down the hall, I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of Nolan snoring in our master bedroom. He slept with the deep, untroubled peace of a man who believed he held all the cards. He thought he was married to a workaholic who was too exhausted by her executive duties to notice the discrepancies in her own life. He forgot that my entire career was built on identifying structural failures. Finding the prenatal clinic charge on our joint credit card was only the first thread. I needed to pull the rest of the sweater apart. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to our shared cloud storage drive. Nolan used it to back up his phone and store documents for his outdoor adventure consulting business. He always claimed he was terrible with technology, relying on me to set up his networks and sync his devices. He used the same password for everything since we were dating in our 20s. The name of his childhood golden retriever, followed by his birth year. I typed it in. The progress bar spun for a fraction of a second before granting me full access to his digital footprint. I bypassed the folders labeled with tax years and marketing drafts, my eyes scanning the directory for anomalies. There it was, a subfolder nested deep within his business archives, vaguely titled Client Itineraries. It was a clever enough name to deter a casual glance, but I am not a casual woman. I clicked the folder. Dozens of PDF documents and image files populated the screen. I opened the first PDF. It was not a schedule for a guided rock climbing tour or a whitewater rafting excursion. It was a finalized invoice for a luxury cabin rental in Moab, nestled right in the heart of the Red Rock Canyons. The dates corresponded to a weekend last October. I remembered that weekend vividly. I had been in Seattle, negotiating a supply chain merger, surviving on lukewarm hotel coffee and 4 hours of sleep. Nolan told me he was taking a group of novice hikers out for a wilderness survival course. I scanned the itemized receipt. Couples hot stone massage. A private chef dinner featuring Wagyu beef and imported truffles. A bottle of vintage Cabernet. The total bill was staggering. I checked the payment method at the bottom of the invoice. It was billed to his business account, an account that I transferred funds into every single month to keep his dream afloat. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. My breathing slowed, evening out into a shallow, calculated rhythm. I opened the next file, and then the next. A boutique hotel in Jackson Hole. A romantic bed and breakfast in Sedona. Thousands of dollars bleeding out of my paycheck to finance their secret life. But the receipts were just the financial betrayal. The true poison was in the image files. He had taken screenshots of his text conversations with Kelsey. I clicked the first image, zooming in on the glowing green and gray bubbles. The timestamp showed 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. "I cannot stop thinking about you," Nolan had written. "You have this organic family energy. Paige is just so rigid now. The corporate world has corrupted her. She does not know how to be soft anymore. She cannot give me what you can." My stomach contracted. I stared at the words, tracing the shape of his manipulation. He was weaponizing modern therapy speak to justify his infidelity, painting himself as a starved soul seeking authentic connection, rather than a parasite feeding off his wife's ambition. I clicked to the next image to read Kelsey's reply. "I know, babe," she wrote. "I am holding space for you. She just does not understand your spirit. We will tell her when the time is right. Just make sure she covers the down payment on the nursery furniture first." I told her I am struggling with the baby prep, and she promised to help me out. A bitter, metallic taste flooded the back of my throat. Kelsey, the younger sister I had bailed out of credit card debt 3 separate times. The sister whose car loan I co-signed because her credit score was non-existent. She was not just sleeping with my husband. She was actively conspiring to drain my resources before tossing me aside. She viewed me as nothing more than a temporary ATM, a stepping stone to the life she felt entitled to steal. I did not cry. Crying is a biological response to sudden loss, and I had not lost anything of value. I had simply uncovered a rot that was already there. I spent the next 3 hours turning my grief into a weapon. I created a secure encrypted digital vault on an external flash drive. Using AES 256-bit encryption, I painstakingly downloaded every single receipt, every hotel booking, every screenshot of their wretched poetry. I organized the files clinically, labeling them by date and location. I built a comprehensive timeline of their affair, cross-referencing his texts with my own travel schedule and the bank statements. By the time I finished, I possessed a flawless, undeniable dossier of their betrayal. The sky outside my office window shifted from ink black to a bruised, icy blue. The sun was coming up over the Wasatch Mountains. I ejected the flash drive, slipped it into the hidden zippered pocket of my leather work tote, and closed all the browser tabs. I cleared the cache, I left the digital environment exactly as I found it. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Heavy footsteps padded toward the kitchen, followed by the familiar grinding sound of the coffee machine. 10 minutes later, the handle of my office door turned. Nolan walked in, wearing his gray sweatpants and a worn-out college t-shirt. His hair was sleep-tousled, falling across his forehead in that boyish way that used to make my heart stutter. He held 2 steaming ceramic mugs. The rich, earthy smell of dark roast coffee filled the small room. "Morning, early bird," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. He walked up behind my chair and set one of the mugs on the desk next to my keyboard. I turned my chair slightly, looking up at the man who had spent the last year laughing at me in the dark. "You are up early," I said, keeping my tone light, casual. "Perfect." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to my cheek. His stubble scratched against my skin. The scent of his cedarwood body wash made my skin crawl, but I did not flinch. I absorbed the contact. "I woke up and you were not in bed," he said, his eyes scanning my blank computer screen. "You work too hard, Paige. You are always burning the candle at both ends." I picked up the coffee mug, letting the heat seep into my freezing hands. "We have a big quarterly review coming up," I replied smoothly. "I am just finalizing some risk assessments." He sighed, shaking his head with a practiced look of loving concern. "Well, I appreciate it. I really do. Your corporate grind really keeps the consulting business afloat while I scale things up. One day, I will be the one bringing home the big checks, and you can finally relax." The sheer audacity of his lie hung in the air between us, heavy and thick. He stood there, drinking coffee paid for by my salary, in a house funded by my stock options, playing the role of the supportive husband while his pregnant mistress slept across town. I took a slow sip of the dark coffee. The bitterness grounded me. I looked at him over the rim of the mug, my lips curving into a soft, agreeable smile. "I am securing our future, Nolan," I said quietly. "You have no idea what I am building." The Sunday afternoon sun beat down on the manicured lawns of my parents' sprawling suburban estate in the Salt Lake Valley. The jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Wasatch Mountains loomed in the distance, a picturesque backdrop to a culture built entirely on the foundation of the pristine nuclear family. In this community, success is not measured by stock options or board seats. It is measured by the number of children running across your yard and the flawless image you project to your neighbors. I stood on the edge of the redwood patio, a crystal glass of iced tea sweating against my palm. The scent of hickory smoke and roasting brisket drifted from the massive outdoor grill where my father held court. To the untrained eye, it was a perfect weekend gathering. To me, it was a crime scene. Nolan was currently putting on the performance of a lifetime. He darted between the kitchen and the patio, fetching fresh lemonade from my mother and carrying heavy trays of side dishes with a boyish, eager charm. Every few minutes, his path miraculously intersected with Kelsey. She sat in a shaded wicker chaise lounge, her hands resting over her pregnant stomach, playing the role of the fragile, expectant mother. I watched Nolan lean down to hand her a plate of fruit. His knuckles brushed against her shoulder, a heavy, lingering touch disguised as familial affection. I took a slow sip of my tea. The ice clinked against the glass. The digital breadcrumbs I had uncovered in his hidden cloud drive played on a continuous loop in my mind. The hotel receipts from Moab, the staggering credit card charges, the late-night text messages where they mocked my rigidity and plotted to extract my money. Watching them interact in broad daylight surrounded by our oblivious family added a sickening new layer to their betrayal. They were not just cheating in the shadows. They were parading their secret right in front of me, intoxicated by their own perceived cleverness. "Paige, sweetheart." The voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Diane Nolan's mother gliding across the patio. Diane was a woman who wielded passive aggression like a finely tuned instrument. She wore a tailored linen blouse and a sympathetic smile that never quite reached her pale, calculating eyes. I forced my facial muscles to soften into a welcoming expression. "Hello, Diane. It is lovely to see you." She stepped uncomfortably close, wrapping her hands around my forearm and squeezing with feigned warmth. "You look tired," she murmured, her gaze sweeping over my face. "You are working too many hours at that tech firm. It is taking a toll on you." "I am managing fine," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "It is the end of the quarter. Things are always a bit demanding." Diane sighed a long, theatrical sound of pity. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I was just talking to your mother about Kelsey. Twins. What an incredible blessing for your family. But I know it must be difficult for you to watch." I held her gaze, refusing to blink. "Difficult in what way?" She gave my arm another patronizing squeeze. "With your struggles, dear. Nolan tells me everything. I know how badly he wants to be a father. He is so patient, so understanding about your medical issues. But a man has needs, Paige. A man needs a legacy. Perhaps if you stepped down from your vice president role, your body would finally relax enough to conceive. You cannot have it all, no matter what modern society tells you." The audacity of her lecture hung in the warm summer air. She was blaming me for my barren womb, standing in my parents' backyard, eating the food my salary paid for, while her son was secretly financing a double life with my younger sister. The irony was so profound it almost choked me. "You are right, Diane," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "Nolan has been incredibly patient. I am sure he will get exactly the legacy he deserves." She patted my arm, satisfied that her venom had landed, and drifted away to join the group around the grill. I set my empty glass on a nearby table and walked over to the shade where Kelsey was holding court. She looked up as I approached, shielding her eyes from the glare. Her smile was bright, greedy, and entirely hollow. "Hey, big sister," Kelsey chirped. "I was hoping you would come over. I need your advice on something." I pulled up a wrought iron chair and sat across from her. "What is on your mind?" She shifted in the lounge chair, playing with the hem of her expensive maternity dress. "I am just feeling so overwhelmed with the baby preparations. Twins require double of everything. I was looking at strollers online last night, and the safety ratings on the cheaper models are terrifying. The only one that guarantees full impact protection is this imported European model, but it is $3,000. Her words mirrored the text messages I had read on Nolan's secret drive just hours prior. "Make sure she covers the down payment on the nursery furniture first." I told her I am struggling with the baby prep, and she promised to help me out. The script was playing out exactly as they had written it. Kelsey was relying on my lifelong habit of bailing her out of financial trouble. She felt entirely entitled to my wealth, viewing it as a communal resource to fund the life she was building with my husband. "That is a steep price for a stroller," I said, maintaining a gentle, supportive tone. "But safety is paramount." She offered a pout, her lower lip jutting out slightly. "I know. I just do not have that kind of cash right now. And with the babies coming, my savings are depleted. I was hoping maybe you could help me out. Consider it an early baby shower gift." I looked into the eyes of the sister I had protected since childhood. The sister whose car I purchased, whose rent I covered during her scattered 20s. I saw nothing but parasitic greed. "Send me the link," I said, my voice devoid of hesitation. "I will order it tonight. You should not have to worry about money right now. Focus on staying healthy for the babies." Kelsey squealed, reaching across the small table to grab my hands. You are the best, Paige. Seriously, I do not know what I would do without you. She leaned forward to give me a hug. As she moved, the neckline of her dress shifted. The afternoon sunlight caught a flash of silver and ice resting against her collarbone. My breath stopped dead in my lungs. Hanging from a delicate platinum chain around Kelsey's neck was a teardrop diamond surrounded by a halo of deep blue sapphires. It was a vintage pendant. It belonged to my grandmother. She had worn it on her wedding day, and it was bequeathed to me upon her passing. I kept it in a velvet box tucked in the back of my mahogany jewelry armoire, waiting for a special occasion to wear it. Nolan had gone into our bedroom. He had opened my private jewelry box, taken a sacred family heirloom, and latched it around the throat of his mistress. The violation was visceral. It bypassed the financial theft and struck directly at my heritage. My vision narrowed, the edges of the patio blurring into a wash of green and brown. A primal, roaring instinct urged me to reach across the table, wrap my fingers around that platinum chain, and rip it from her neck. I wanted to drag her out of the chair and expose them both, right there on the manicured grass. But a public screaming match would only give them the opportunity to spin the narrative. Nolan would play the victim. He would claim my demanding career drove him away, that my infertility broke his spirit. He would use Diane and my traditional family to paint me as the villain. I forced my hands to remain flat on the armrests of my chair. I swallowed the rising tide of fury, pushing it down deep into the frozen vault in my chest. "That is a beautiful necklace," I said, my voice eerily calm. Kelsey froze for a fraction of a second. Her hand flew up to her chest, her fingers hovering nervously over the diamond. "Oh, this," she stammered, a frantic flicker of panic in her eyes. "It was a gift from a friend. I just love vintage pieces." "It suits you," I replied, holding her gaze until she looked away. I stood up, excusing myself to help my mother in the kitchen. As I walked across the patio, I caught Nolan watching me from by the grill. He flashed me a bright, oblivious grin, raising his beer bottle in a silent toast. I smiled back. A standard divorce would divide our assets in half. A standard divorce would grant Nolan spousal support, allowing him to walk away with a portion of my tech equity and half the equity in our home. He would take my money and start a new life with my sister and my stolen heirloom. That was unacceptable. I did not want a division of assets. I wanted total forfeiture. To execute a flawless legal trap, I needed Nolan to sign away his rights willingly. I needed him blinded by his own greed. I needed a contract so ironclad that no judge in the state of Utah could unravel it. As I stepped into the cool, air-conditioned quiet of my parents' kitchen, the blueprint for my revenge crystallized. I was going to draft a post-nuptial agreement, and I was going to use Nolan's towering hubris as the bait. The Wasatch Mountains cast long shadows over my parents' sprawling backyard. In our corner of Utah, Sunday afternoons are sacred. They are not just meals, they are performances. Success in this community is not measured by the title on your office door or the balance in your investment portfolio. It is measured by the flawless projection of domestic bliss. You are expected to have a manicured lawn, a smiling spouse, and children running through the sprinklers. I had the lawn. I had the smiling husband. The children were the missing piece, a void that had become the defining feature of my identity in the eyes of my family. Nolan thrived in this environment. He stood by the stainless steel grill, a pair of silver tongs in his hand, laughing at a joke my father just told. The smoke from roasting hickory wood and marinated ribs clung to his designer polo shirt. He looked every inch the devoted son-in-law. He seamlessly transitioned from flipping burgers to fetching fresh lemonade for my mother, his boyish charm operating at maximum capacity. He played his role so well that anyone watching would think he was the luckiest man alive. I stood near the patio doors, holding a glass of iced tea. watching the moisture bead on the glass. I knew the truth. I knew about the Park City Clinic and the secret cloud drive. Watching him perform his loyalty made the iced tea taste like ash in my mouth. Kelsey sat a few yards away in a shaded wicker chair. She was the center of attention. Aunts and cousins hovered around her, bringing her plates of potato salad and asking to touch her growing stomach. She soaked up the adoration, playing the radiant, expectant mother with practiced ease. Nolan walked over and handed her a plate. He did not just hand it to her. He leaned down, his shoulder brushing against hers, his voice dropping to a register too low for anyone else to hear. It was a micro-interaction, a fleeting moment of shared intimacy that disguised itself as familial care. My stomach tightened. The sheer arrogance of their display was breathtaking. They were flaunting their secret right in front of me, shielded by the wholesome facade of a Sunday family gathering. The patio screen door slid open, and Nolan's mother stepped outside. Diane was a woman who navigated social situations like a predator in a garden. She wore a crisp linen blouse and a sympathetic smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. She spotted me standing alone and altered her path, zeroing in with terrifying precision. "Hello, Diane," I said, forcing the muscles in my face to form a polite, unbothered expression. "Paige, sweetheart," she murmured, stepping uncomfortably close. She wrapped her hands around my forearm, her manicured nails digging slightly into my skin. "You look so tired. That tech firm is working you to the bone. It is taking a terrible toll on your complexion." "I am managing fine," I replied, keeping my tone even and measured. Diane sighed a long, theatrical exhalation designed to convey deep pity. She leaned closer, her floral perfume clashing with the smell of the barbecue smoke. "I was just talking to your mother about Kelsey. Twins. What a profound blessing. But I know it must be excruciating for you to watch given your struggles." I held my ground, refusing to let my gaze waver. "I am happy for my sister, Diane." She squeezed my arm again, her voice dipping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Nolan tells me everything, dear. I know how badly he wants to be a father. He is so patient with your medical issues, but a man needs a legacy. Perhaps if you stepped away from your vice president role, your body would finally relax enough to conceive. You cannot have it all, Paige. Modern society lies to women like you." The toxicity of her words hung in the warm summer air. She was blaming me for my barren womb, standing in my parents' backyard eating the food my paycheck provided, while her son financed a double life with my younger sister. I documented the microaggression in my mind, adding it to the growing ledger of their destruction. "You are right, Diane," I said, my voice smooth as polished stone. "Nolan has been incredibly patient. I am sure he will get exactly the legacy he deserves." She patted my arm, satisfied that her venom had landed, and drifted away to join the crowd around the grill. I needed space to breathe. I set my glass down and walked toward the far side of the patio, seeking the quiet of the garden path. But Kelsey intercepted me. She stepped into my path, a bright, greedy smile plastered across her face. "Hey, big sister," she chirped, resting a hand on her stomach. "I wanted to thank you again for promising to help with the nursery furniture. You are a lifesaver." I looked into the eyes of the sister I had protected since childhood. I saw nothing but parasitic entitlement. Before I could formulate a neutral response, the afternoon sunlight caught a flash of silver and ice resting against her collarbone. My breath stopped dead in my lungs. Hanging from a delicate platinum chain around Kelsey's neck was a teardrop diamond surrounded by a halo of deep blue sapphires. It was a vintage pendant. It was not just any piece of jewelry. It belonged to my grandmother. She had worn it on her wedding day, and it was bequeathed to me upon her passing. I kept it hidden in a velvet box tucked in the back of my mahogany jewelry armoire, waiting for a special occasion to wear it. Nolan had gone into our master bedroom. He had opened my private jewelry box, taken a sacred family heirloom, and latched it around the throat of his mistress. The violation bypassed the financial theft and struck directly at my heritage. My vision narrowed. The edges of the patio blurred into a wash of green and brown. A primal roaring instinct surged through my veins. My hands curled into fists at my sides. Every fiber of my being urged me to reach across the distance, wrap my fingers around that platinum chain, and rip it from her neck. I wanted to drag her onto the grass and expose them both right there in front of my parents, Diane, and every oblivious guest. But a public screaming match would only give them the opportunity to spin the narrative. If I exploded, Nolan would play the victim. He would claim my demanding career drove him away, that my infertility broke his spirit, and that my sudden rage proved I was unstable. He would use Diane and my traditional family to paint me as the hysterical, barren villain. I forced my hands to uncurl. I pressed my fingernails into my palms until the sharp pain grounded me. I swallowed the rising tide of fury, pushing it down deep into the frozen vault in my chest. "That is a beautiful necklace," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of tremor. Kelsey froze for a fraction of a second. Her hand flew up to her chest, her fingers hovering nervously over the diamond. "Oh, this," she stammered, a frantic flicker of panic flashing in her eyes. "It was a gift. From a friend. I just love vintage pieces." "It suits you," I replied, holding her gaze until she looked away. I turned and walked into the cool, air-conditioned quiet of my parents' house. The heavy glass door slid shut behind me, muting the sounds of the barbecue. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. A standard divorce would divide our assets in half. A standard divorce would grant Nolan spousal support, allowing him to walk away with a portion of my tech equity and half the value of our home. He would take my money, marry my sister, and build his new life funded by my hard work. That was unacceptable. I did not want a division of assets. I wanted total forfeiture. To execute a flawless legal trap, I needed Nolan to sign away his rights willingly. I needed him blinded by his own greed. I needed a contract so ironclad that no judge in the state of Utah could unravel it. As I stood in the quiet kitchen, the blueprint for my revenge crystallized. I was going to draft a post-nuptial agreement, and I was going to use Nolan's towering hubris as the bait. But first, I had to make him believe I was breaking. The evening sun dipped below the Ochre Mountains, casting long shadows across my kitchen floor. I stood at the granite island, staring at a pile of outdated medical brochures. I had dug them out of a forgotten box in the guest room closet. They detailed expensive in vitro fertilization treatments and hormone therapies. They were artifacts from a time when I genuinely believed my body was the problem. Now they were props. To capture a predator, you do not chase them. You play dead. I needed Nolan to feel invincible. A man plotting a secret life with his pregnant sister-in-law is already walking a tightrope of paranoia. If I acted too calm or too agreeable after the barbecue, he might sense a shift in the wind. I needed to feed him the exact narrative he had spent years crafting. I needed to become the broken, barren corporate executive he loved to pity. I picked up a paring knife and a yellow onion. I sliced into the root, letting the pungent sulfur compounds rise into the air. My eyes stung. I kept my face hovering over the cutting board until the tears pooled and spilled over my lashes. I rubbed my knuckles under my eyes, smudging my mascara into dark, bruised shadows. I let my shoulders slump, curving my spine into a posture of sheer defeat. I took a deep breath and waited. At 6:15, the front door unlocked. Heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor of the foyer. Nolan dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, humming a cheerful tune. He had spent the day supposedly scouting climbing routes in Big Cottonwood Canyon. I knew from the tracking software I installed on his phone that he had actually been at a baby boutique in Sugar House, looking at cribs with Kelsey. He strolled into the kitchen, smelling of fresh air and deceit. He stopped mid-stride when he saw me. "Paige," he asked, his voice laced with sudden caution. "What is wrong?" I let the paring knife clatter onto the granite counter. I buried my face in my hands and let out a ragged, wet sob. It was a performance worthy of a stage, but fueled by genuine exhaustion. I was tired of the lies. I was tired of his face. I channeled all that disgust into a convincing display of sorrow. "I cannot do it anymore, Nolan!" I choked out, my voice trembling. "I cannot keep pretending I am fine." He crossed the room quickly. His heavy footsteps closed the distance between us. He placed his hands on my shoulders, turning me to face him. He looked down at my tear-stained cheeks and the smeared makeup. The caution in his eyes melted into a sickening gleam of triumph. He loved this. He loved seeing the successful, high-earning woman reduced to a weeping mess. Hey, he murmured, wrapping his arms around me, pulling my face against his chest. "Talk to me. What brought this on?" I pressed my palms against his fleece vest, forcing myself not to shove him away. The scent of another woman's perfume clung faintly to his collar. Kelsey always wore a distinct vanilla and amber fragrance. It turned my stomach, but I squeezed my eyes shut and leaned into the embrace. "It is Kelsey," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. Seeing her at the barbecue on Sunday, seeing her glowing and pregnant, it broke something inside me, Nolan. You were right. You were right all along. The stress of my job, the constant traveling, the corporate ladder, it ruined my body. I failed you. I cannot give you the family you deserve. The silence that followed was heavy with his inflating ego. He rested his chin on the top of my head, stroking my hair with slow, patronizing movements. "You did not fail me, Paige," he said softly. "We are just on a difficult journey. I told you years ago that your career was taking a toll on your health. You just did not want to listen. But we will figure it out. I am here for you." He was playing the benevolent savior. He felt so powerful standing in the kitchen, my money paid for, forgiving me for a medical condition he knew was actually his own fault. His hubris swelled, filling the room. He believed he was holding a fragile, shattered bird. He had no idea he was embracing a loaded gun. I pulled back slightly, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "I just feel so inadequate," I sniffled. "I feel like you are going to realize you deserve better and leave me." Nolan smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that hid a heart full of rot. "I am not going anywhere, Paige. You are my wife. We are in this together." That night marked a shift in the atmosphere of our home. By feeding his narcissism, I created a blind spot the size of a canyon. Because Nolan believed I was consumed by self-pity and desperate to save our marriage, his paranoia vanished. The sixth conflict of our silent war took root. It was Nolan against his own arrogance. Over the next 2 weeks, he became careless. He stopped taking his phone into the bathroom every time he showered. He left his laptop open on the dining table when he went out for a run. He no longer whispered when taking phone calls in the home office. He assumed a woman drowning in depression lacked the energy to audit her husband's life. He thought he had me securely boxed into a corner, crying over fertility brochures, while he planned a future with my sister. His complacency gave me the exact window of opportunity I needed to act. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I told Nolan I had a marathon strategy meeting at the tech firm. Instead, I drove my car into the underground parking garage of a sleek glass building in downtown Salt Lake City. I took the private elevator to the top floor, stepping into a lobby lined with dark mahogany and brushed steel. I was not there for a therapy session. I was there to meet Jordan. Jordan was a senior partner at the most ruthless corporate law firm in Utah. We had crossed paths during a hostile tech acquisition 3 years prior. He was sharp, unsentimental, and surgically precise in his execution. He did not deal in emotions. He dealt in leverage. His assistant ushered me into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Jordan sat behind a sprawling desk, wearing a tailored navy suit. He stood up and offered a firm handshake. "Paige," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. "It is good to see you again, though I assume this is not a social call." I sat down, crossing my legs. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I opened my designer tote and pulled out a thick printed file containing the financial records, the hotel invoices, and a curated selection of the text messages between Nolan and Kelsey. I slid the folder across the polished desk. "I need to dissolve my marriage, Jordan," I said, my tone calm and businesslike. "But a standard divorce is out of the question. I am the primary earner. I own significant tech equity. If I file today, my husband will seek alimony and claim half of my assets. He is currently orchestrating an affair with my younger sister who is pregnant with his children. They are planning to use my wealth to fund their new life." Jordan opened the folder. He spent several minutes scanning the documents, his expression unreadable. He flipped through the receipts, tracing the flow of my money into Nolan's illicit weekend getaways. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp with professional interest. "This is a compelling narrative, Paige," he said, closing the folder. "But Utah is a no-fault divorce state. Infidelity does not automatically protect your assets from equitable distribution. The court will still look at the length of the marriage and your earning capacity." "I know," I replied, leaning forward. "That is why we are not going to court yet. I want you to draft a postnuptial agreement." Jordan raised a single eyebrow. A postnup. They are notoriously difficult to enforce if the other party can prove they signed under duress or without proper legal counsel. "Why would your husband sign an agreement that strips him of his rights now?" "Because he thinks he is smarter than me," I said, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. "He believes I am emotionally unstable and desperate to save our marriage. I am going to offer him a financial incentive to sign the document, something he desperately needs right now. We are going to bury a forfeiture clause so deep in corporate legalese that he will never see the blade dropping until it is too late." Jordan steepled his fingers, a glint of genuine admiration in his eyes. "You want to build a financial guillotine?" I nodded. "And I want you to hold the rope." We spent the next 2 hours outlining the parameters of the trap. We needed a document that appeared to protect Nolan's interests while secretly containing the mechanism for his total ruin. The trap had to be flawless. It had to be irresistible. And I knew exactly what kind of bait would make my husband blindly sign away his future. The heavy oak front door clicked shut, echoing through the foyer. It was Thursday evening. The scent of roasted garlic and rosemary drifted from the kitchen where Nolan was playing the role of the attentive domestic partner. Since my staged breakdown the previous week, he had doubled down on his performance. He cooked dinner, poured my wine, and rubbed my shoulders, always wearing the smug, satisfied expression of a man who believed he had successfully tamed a complicated woman. I walked into the kitchen carrying my sleek leather portfolio. I set it down on the granite island next to a platter of roasted vegetables. I wore my tailored gray suit, keeping the armor of my corporate life fully intact. I needed the visual reinforcement for the lie I was about to sell. "You look exhausted," he said, handing me a glass of Pinot Noir. His voice held that familiar, patronizing warmth. "You should sit down. I have everything under control here." I took a slow sip of the wine, letting the dry, tart flavor settle on my tongue. "I am fine," I replied, pulling out a stool and sitting at the island. "But we need to have a serious conversation about our finances." Nolan paused, his grip tightening on the wooden spoon he was using to stir the pasta. His eyes darted toward my leather portfolio, a flash of genuine panic crossing his features. A man hiding a double life lives in constant fear of financial audits. He forced his shoulders to relax, turning toward me with a practiced look of innocent curiosity. "Finances," he echoed. "Did something happen at work?" I let out a heavy, manufactured sigh, resting my elbows on the cool stone counter. The board of directors held an emergency session today. We are preparing for a major acquisition next quarter. The acquiring firm is scrutinizing every executive profile. They are demanding extreme risk mitigation across the board. Nolan frowned, leaning against the counter. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they are enforcing a new policy regarding executive equity," I said, maintaining unwavering eye contact. "To prevent corporate assets from becoming entangled in civil litigation or personal disputes, they are requiring all senior partners to execute formal asset separation agreements. It is standard spousal risk mitigation." He stared at me, processing the corporate jargon. "You mean a post-nuptial agreement?" I nodded, pulling a thick bound document from my portfolio. It was 40 pages of dense, impenetrable legalese crafted by the most ruthless attorney in the state. I slid it across the granite surface. The heavy paper landed with a soft, authoritative thud. Nolan did not reach for it immediately. He crossed his arms, a defensive posture taking over. "Paige, we have been married for 8 years. Why would I sign a document that separates our assets? Now that sounds like they are trying to box me out of the equity we built together." I expected the resistance. Greed is a predictable emotion. He felt entitled to the stock options I earned, while he spent his days hiking and plotting with my sister. I needed to pivot smoothly to the bait. I pushed back against the board. I lied, my voice softening into a tone of collaborative frustration. I told them it was an insulting request, but they threatened to withhold my vesting schedule if we do not comply. So, I negotiated a compromise. His defensive posture faltered just a fraction. A compromise. I tapped the thick stack of paper. "If we sign this restructuring agreement, the board will authorize an immediate liquidity event for my vested shares. I arranged for a direct transfer of $200,000 to be injected straight into your consulting business. Tax-free capital, Nolan." The air in the kitchen shifted. I watched his pupils dilate. $200,000 was more money than his outdoor adventure business had generated in its entire existence. It was a life-altering sum for a man drowning in secret credit card debt. To him, that money represented freedom. It meant he could secure the down payment for a new house. He could fund the lavish nursery Kelsey kept demanding. He could finalize his escape plan without ever having to worry about money again. He reached out and pulled the document toward him. The defensive posture evaporated, replaced by a hungry, eager energy. 200,000, he repeated, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "It is yours," I said, taking another sip of wine. You can finally scale the business the way you always wanted. You will not have to rely on my monthly transfers anymore. You will be entirely independent. He flipped open the cover page. The document was designed to exhaust the reader. The first 10 pages were filled with tedious definitions, jurisdictional parameters, and standard indemnification clauses. I watched his eyes scan the dense paragraphs. He was a man who hated reading contracts. He lacked the discipline for fine print. As he turned the pages, the silence in the kitchen grew heavy. The only sound was the ticking of the stainless steel wall clock and the soft rustle of the paper. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. I was not anxious. I was a predator, watching my prey walk willingly into the snare. He reached page 12, page 13. Page 14 contained the trap. Buried under a section titled Fiduciary Duties and Marital Estate Preservation was a subsection defining moral turpitude. Jordan had crafted the language with surgical precision. It stipulated that if either party engaged in conduct detrimental to the marital bond, specifically defined as infidelity, deceit, or financial dissipation, the offending party would forfeit all rights to the marital estate. They would surrender all claims to property, equity, and spousal support. Nolan stared at page 14. I held my breath, locking my muscles into place. If he actually read the words, if he comprehended the legal weight of the forfeiture clause, the entire plan would shatter. He would hire his own lawyer. He would contest the document. But his eyes were glazed over. He was not reading the Latin phrases or the complex conditional sentences. He was thinking about the money. He was thinking about Kelsey. He was envisioning the life he was going to buy with my $200,000. He flipped past page 14 without asking a single question. He skimmed the remaining sections, jumping straight to the final signature page. He looked up at me, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He thought he had outsmarted the high-powered corporate executive. He thought my desperate need to appease my board of directors had just handed him the winning lottery ticket. "Do we need a notary?" he asked, grabbing a black pen from the cup on the counter. "Jordan already notarized my signature at the office," I replied, gesturing to the embossed stamp at the bottom of the page. "You just need to sign and date it. I will file it with the legal department tomorrow morning." Nolan did not hesitate. He pressed the pen to the heavy stock paper. The sharp scratching sound of his signature echoed in the quiet kitchen. He dated the document, flipped the cover shut, and pushed it back across the granite island. He walked around the counter, pulling me into a tight embrace. He kissed the top of my head, resting his cheek against my hair. "We are going to do great things, Paige," he murmured. "This capital is going to change everything for us." I rested my hands on his waist, feeling the crisp fabric of his shirt. "You have no idea," I whispered into his chest. I stepped back, picking up the signed document and sliding it safely into my leather portfolio. The trap was armed. The financial guillotine was raised and locked into position. Nolan was now legally bound to a contract that would leave him destitute the moment his secret came to light. But securing the assets was only the first phase of the extraction. To facilitate the illusion of the corporate restructuring, I needed to untangle the rest of our shared logistics. I sat back down on the stool, picking up my wine glass. "The board also needs us to separate our health insurance policies," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "Risk mitigation extends to medical liabilities. I am going to transition you to an independent premium plan next week. I just need to pull our old claims history to finalize the underwriting." Nolan returned to the stove, stirring the pasta with renewed vigor. "No problem," he said, tossing a handful of salt into the boiling water. "Whatever you need to do to keep the board happy. Just let me know if you need any signatures. He was so intoxicated by his impending payday that he handed me the keys to his medical history without a second thought. He did not realize that the health insurance portal contained a secret, far more devastating than stolen money or weekend cabin rentals. He did not know that by authorizing me to audit our medical claims, he was about to hand me the final definitive weapon I needed to destroy him and my sister. The rain tapped a sporadic rhythm against the glass of my home office window. It was late Friday night, and the suburban neighborhood outside lay hidden beneath a thick blanket of Utah darkness. Down the hall, the rhythmic sound of Nolan breathing in his sleep echoed through the quiet house. He rested with the deep, undisturbed peace of a man who believed he had just secured his financial independence. By signing the postnuptial agreement, he thought he had won the war. He had no idea I was currently navigating the digital battlefield he had so carelessly unlocked for me. My laptop screen cast a harsh, sterile glow across my desk. I had logged into our joint health insurance provider portal, utilizing the authorization Nolan had granted me earlier that week. My initial goal was straightforward. I needed to download our claims history to formalize the separation of our medical liabilities, ensuring the paperwork mirrored the fictitious corporate mandate I had sold him. I exported the data into a spreadsheet and began filtering the columns. The rows were filled with mundane entries: dental cleanings, vision exams, a few copays for urgent care visits when Nolan twisted an ankle on a hiking trail. I scrolled back through the years, intending to export a clean 3-year summary for my attorney. Then a glaring anomaly caught my eye. The billing code did not match a general practitioner or a sports medicine clinic. The date was stamped November, 3 years prior. The provider was listed as an out-of-network specialist located in a high-end medical plaza in downtown Salt Lake City. I cross-referenced the provider identification number in a new browser tab. The search results returned the name of a prominent urology and fertility clinic. A cold, heavy sensation settled at the base of my throat. 3 years ago, we had just begun our grueling journey through fertility treatments. At the time, Nolan had been reluctant to undergo any testing himself, claiming he felt perfectly fine and that his active lifestyle guaranteed his health. He insisted the doctors focus on me. I spent months subjecting my body to invasive ultrasounds, blood panels, and synthetic hormones. Yet here was a hidden insurance claim, proving he had visited a fertility specialist on his own without ever mentioning a word of it to me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The patient portal offered a feature to view attached laboratory results and physician notes for past claims, provided you answered the security questions. Because I was the one who set up his digital life, I knew the name of his first-grade teacher and the street he grew up on. I typed the answers. The system granted me access. I clicked the blue hyperlink labeled Laboratory Report. A PDF document loaded onto my screen. The header bore the logo of the andrology clinic. Below it, Nolan's name and date of birth were printed in stark black ink. I scanned the rows of medical jargon, my eyes darting across columns detailing volume, motility, and morphology. I reached the line labeled Sperm Concentration. The numerical value next to it was 0. I stopped breathing. The hum of the computer fan seemed to amplify, filling the silence of the room. I scrolled down to the attending physician's assessment at the bottom of the page. The clinical notes were brief, but devastatingly clear. Patient presents with severe, irreversible azoospermia. Patient history indicates a severe testicular infection resulting from the mumps virus at age 18, leading to permanent tissue damage. Prognosis for biological reproduction is 0%. Patient has been advised of his total sterility and counseled on alternative family-building options. I read the paragraph 3 times. The words blurred together, then sharpened with agonizing clarity. Nolan was sterile. He had been sterile since he was a teenager. The sheer magnitude of his deception crashed over me like a physical weight. For 3 years, I had blamed myself. I had wept in the pristine waiting rooms of fertility clinics, clutching crumpled tissues, feeling like a defective woman. I had endured grueling rounds of hormone injections that left me bruised, bloated, and emotionally raw. I had listened to Diane, his mother, offer condescending sympathy while suggesting my demanding tech career was the reason my womb was empty. And Nolan had watched all of it happen. He sat beside me in those waiting rooms, holding my hand, playing the role of the tragic, supportive husband. He watched me inject myself with synthetic hormones, knowing it was entirely futile. He let me carry the crushing weight of our empty nursery because he was too cowardly to admit his own biological failure. He weaponized my ambition, twisting the narrative to convince me and our entire community that my corporate lifestyle was the problem. He protected his fragile ego at the cost of my sanity. The cruelty required to maintain that lie was beyond narcissism. It was pure, unadulterated sociopathy. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the ceiling. The anger that washed through me was not hot or frantic. It was glacial. It froze the remaining tether of empathy I held for the man sleeping down the hall. I looked back at the screen, staring at the stark zero printed on the laboratory report. Then a new thought pierced through the haze of my anger. A thought so jarring, it scrambled my understanding of reality. If Nolan was 100% sterile, lacking the physical capability to produce a single viable cell, then whose babies were currently growing inside my sister's stomach? I sat up straight, the leather chair creaking beneath me. My mind raced, connecting the scattered puzzle pieces of the last 4 months. Kelsey had announced her twin pregnancy with radiant triumph. She had allowed Nolan to place his hand on her chair, sharing a secret glance that communicated their shared parentage. In his hidden text messages, Nolan had waxed poetic about building a legacy with her, praising her organic family energy. He genuinely believed he was the father of those twins. He was stealing my money and destroying our marriage to build a life with children he thought were his own. But the medical science staring at me from the glowing screen proved that was biologically impossible. The realization bloomed in my chest, a dark, brilliant flower of dramatic irony. Kelsey was running a con of her own. My sister, who had spent her entire adult life relying on my financial bailouts, must have gotten pregnant by someone else. Perhaps it was a brief fling. Perhaps it was a man who refused to take responsibility, or a man whose bank account did not meet her high standards. Finding herself pregnant and desperate, she needed a savior. She needed a man gullible enough to believe a miraculous pregnancy, eager enough for a child to bypass logical questions, and most importantly, a man with direct access to substantial wealth. She chose my husband. She played on his deep-seated insecurity and his desperate desire for a legacy. She seduced him, pinned another man's children on him, and manipulated him into draining my assets to fund her nursery. Kelsey did not know Nolan was sterile. Nolan did not know he was a pawn. They were playing each other united only by their parasitic greed for my tech salary. The layers of fraud were so dense, so perfectly entangled, that they had unknowingly built the very trap that would destroy them both. I hit the print command on my keyboard. The laser printer in the corner of the office whirred to life, sliding the warm sheet of paper into the output tray. I picked up the medical report, holding the biological nuclear code in my hands. I folded the paper and placed it into a heavy manila envelope, resting it beside the flash drive that contained the hotel receipts and text transcripts. I slid the envelope into the hidden compartment of my locked filing cabinet. The financial guillotine was in place. The medical truth was secured. I held every card in the deck. But documentation alone was not enough for the reckoning I was planning. I did not just want to hand them paperwork in a quiet room. I wanted to watch the illusion shatter in real time. Before I could finalize the guest list for the upcoming baby shower, I needed to see their delusion up close. I needed to document them playing house, existing in the false reality they had constructed. I needed photographic proof of their domestic fantasy to serve as the visual centerpiece of their public execution. I closed the laptop and looked out the window toward the Wasatch Mountains. Nolan had casually mentioned a solitary spiritual retreat planned for the upcoming weekend. He claimed he needed to meditate in the wilderness to clear his head for his consulting business. I knew exactly where that retreat would take place, and I knew exactly who would be joining him. It was time to take a drive to Park City. The air outside my windshield grew thinner and colder as my vehicle climbed the steep, winding roads of Parley's Canyon. The elevation gauge on my dashboard ticked upward, climbing past 6,000 feet. Snow blanketed the towering pine trees, transforming the rugged landscape into a stark, white fortress. It was a Saturday morning. Nolan had left the house before dawn, kissing my forehead and whispering about needing the silence of the mountains to align his chakras and focus on his consulting business. I waited exactly 30 minutes after his taillights vanished before opening the tracking application on my tablet. I had placed a small magnetic tracking node under the rear bumper of his vehicle weeks ago. The blinking red dot on my screen was moving steadily toward a remote, affluent subdivision on the outskirts of Park City. I parked my car on a narrow shoulder 2 blocks down from the destination. The cabin was a sprawling structure of dark timber and river rock nestled deep within a grove of ancient aspens. It was exactly the type of luxury rental my tech salary could easily afford, but Nolan had paid for it using the business account I funded. I killed the engine. The heater died, leaving me in the rapidly dropping temperature of the insulated cabin. I rolled down my passenger side window just enough to slip the barrel of my digital camera through the gap. The metal body of the camera was freezing against my bare hands. I attached the telephoto lens, twisting the focus ring until the heavy wooden front door of the rental property came into sharp, crystalline relief. 10 minutes later, the dark green vehicle belonging to my husband crunched up the gravel driveway. My heart slammed against my ribs, mimicking the frantic beat of a trapped bird. The driver's side door opened, and Nolan stepped out, stretching his arms over his head like a man entirely at peace with the universe. Then the passenger door opened. Kelsey emerged, bundled in a cream-colored cashmere coat I had bought her for Christmas 2 years prior. Her baby bump was visible beneath the soft wool. She laughed at something Nolan said, throwing her head back in a display of carefree joy. The sight of them together, operating in the broad daylight of their shared delusion, triggered a visceral chemical reaction in my brain. The primal instinct to drop the camera, throw open my car door, and march up that gravel driveway was nearly blinding. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to tear that cashmere coat off her shoulders and smash his arrogant face into the frozen earth. The adrenaline flooded my veins, demanding immediate destructive action. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned a bruised shade of purple. I forced myself to inhale the freezing mountain air, counting backward from 10. Confrontation was a tactical error. If I stormed that porch right now, Nolan would spin the narrative. He would play the victim, claiming my erratic behavior justified his wandering eye. He would convince our family I had lost my mind. The discipline that carried me to the top of the corporate ladder anchored me to my seat. I was not a woman who threw tantrums. I was an executive who executed strategic terminations. I lifted the camera back to my eye. Through the viewfinder, I watched Nolan walk around the back of the car and haul out 3 canvas bags overflowing with expensive organic groceries. Kelsey waddled up the wooden steps of the porch, unlocking the heavy front door. She turned around, leaning against the doorframe, waiting for him. Nolan climbed the steps, dropped the grocery bags onto the wooden planks, and wrapped his arms around her waist. He pulled her close, burying his face in her neck. Then he lifted his head and kissed her. It was not a brief familial peck. It was a deep, lingering kiss, born of extreme comfort and shared secrets. The shutter of my camera clicked rapidly, firing off 20 frames in quick succession. The digital sensor captured every damning detail. The way his hands rested on her pregnant belly. The way she tangled her fingers in his hair. The irrefutable, undeniable truth of their betrayal locked forever in high-resolution pixels. They carried the groceries inside and kicked the front door shut. The cabin windows glowed with warm, golden light against the snowy backdrop. My surveillance objective was met, but a new localized desire took root in my chest. I did not just want to gather evidence. I wanted to plant a seed of chaos in his mind. I wanted him to feel the creeping edges of paranoia before the real trap sprang. I stepped out of my car, my boots crunching softly against the packed snow. The frigid air bit at my exposed cheeks as I walked up the desolate road toward his parked vehicle. I knew Nolan possessed terrible habits when it came to security. He grew up in a quiet neighborhood where people rarely locked their doors, and he carried that naive arrogance into adulthood. I pulled the handle of the passenger side door. It clicked open with a quiet mechanical thud. The interior smelled faintly of his cedar body wash and the cloying vanilla perfume my sister bathed herself in. I reached under the front edge of the passenger seat, locating the metal adjustment bar. With a smooth, silent motion, I pulled the bar up and slid the seat forward exactly 2 inches. It was a microscopic adjustment. A casual observer would never notice the difference. But Kelsey was 5 inches shorter than me. When they drove back down the mountain, she would sit in that seat. Nolan would notice the seat was out of position. He would assume Kelsey moved it. Kelsey would swear she had not touched it. A tiny, invisible wedge of confusion and distrust would slide between them. I locked the door and wiped the handle clean with my coat sleeve. It was a tiny stone tossed into their perfect pond, designed to cause a lingering ripple. I walked back to my car, my breath pluming in the freezing air. I climbed inside, started the engine, and turned the heater up to maximum. As I navigated the winding roads back down toward the Salt Lake Valley, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. I waited until I hit a straight stretch of highway before glancing at the screen. A new text message from Nolan illuminated the dashboard. "The air up here is incredibly restorative," he wrote. "The solitude is exactly what my spirit needed to recalibrate. I am going to turn my phone off for the next 48 hours and just exist in the silence. I miss you, Paige." A cold, humorless smile spread across my face. He was sitting in a luxury cabin funded by my hard work, wrapping his arms around a woman carrying another man's children while texting me about spiritual alignment. The hypocrisy was almost poetic. I picked up my phone, navigating to our message thread. I typed my response with steady, deliberate thumbs. "Take all the time you need," I wrote. "Find your truth, honey." I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and merged onto the interstate. The digital breadcrumbs were securely locked in my encrypted vault. The medical diagnosis proving his sterility was safely hidden in my filing cabinet. The high-definition photographs of his infidelity were currently transferring to my cloud backup. The legal post-nuptial guillotine was signed, sealed, and ready to drop. I possessed every weapon necessary to annihilate their lives. The gathering phase was over. Now it was time to build the stage where the execution would take place. My mother had been talking about throwing a lavish baby shower for Kelsey next month. She was looking for a venue large enough to accommodate our extended family and all of our mutual friends. As the city skyline came into view through my windshield, I knew exactly where that party needed to happen. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice vibrating with frantic energy over the speakerphone in my office. She had spent the last 3 days trying to secure a country club venue for the upcoming baby shower, but everything was booked solid for the summer wedding season. She was stressing about deposit deadlines and expanding guest lists. I let her vent for exactly 2 minutes before offering the perfect solution. "We should host it at my house," I said, keeping my tone bright and supportive. "Our backyard is pristine right now, and the open concept living room can easily accommodate 40 people. Plus, it will save you the venue fee." My mother nearly wept with gratitude, calling me the most generous daughter a mother could ask for. She did not know I was not offering a venue. I was constructing a courtroom. The 11th conflict of my silent war began the moment Kelsey arrived at my doorstep to plan the logistics. She did not come to collaborate. She came to dictate. She treated my sprawling suburban home like a rented banquet hall, and me like her hired event coordinator. She handed me a printed list of demands spanning 3 pages. She insisted on a high-end organic catering company from downtown Salt Lake City because her delicate stomach could only handle specific gluten-free artisan pastries. She wanted a bespoke mocktail bar and a custom floral arch woven with imported white roses. I sat at my granite kitchen island taking meticulous notes. I nodded along to every extravagant request, pulling out my credit card to cover the deposits without a single sigh of protest. I watched her scan my living room, calculating how soon she would be redecorating it once she and Nolan ousted me from the premises. Her sheer entitlement fueled my focus. I smiled, offering to upgrade her floral art to include rare orchids. I wanted the stage to look breathtaking for her final performance. Nolan played his role with a devotion that turned my stomach. The day before the shower, he took the afternoon off from his imaginary consulting work to help Kelsey arrange the pastel balloon garlands. I excused myself to my home office, claiming I had an emergency supply chain crisis to manage. I left the door cracked open just an inch. Through the narrow gap, I watched them standing by the marble fireplace. Nolan reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Kelsey's ear. His fingers lingered, tracing the line of her jaw. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "Just a little longer," he whispered, his voice carrying through the quiet hallway. "Soon we will not have to hide anymore. We are so close, babe." The audacity was suffocating. He was standing on the Persian rug I purchased, plotting my eviction with the woman carrying a stranger's children. I silently closed my office door, locking it from the inside. I opened a secure application on my tablet, connecting directly to our smart home security network. When we built the house, I had discrete high-definition cameras installed in the main living areas for burglary protection. Nolan always forgot they existed because they blended seamlessly into the crown molding. I spent the next hour calibrating the lenses. I adjusted the angles to ensure the velvet armchair where Kelsey would sit was dead center in the frame. I boosted the audio receptors, testing the microphone sensitivity by dropping a pen on my desk. The sharp clack registered perfectly on the playback. Every lie they told, every panicked excuse they attempted to spin would be recorded in crystal-clear digital formats. I was not just going to destroy them in front of our family. I was creating an unassailable permanent record of their ruin. Saturday arrived bathed in brilliant Utah sunshine. The house filled rapidly with laughter, the clinking of iced tea glasses, and the scent of expensive catered pastries. Aunts, uncles, and mutual friends crowded into the living room, tossing brightly wrapped boxes onto the designated gift table. My parents buzzed around the room, greeting everyone with radiant pride. Diane arrived wearing a tailored emerald suit. She found me near the mocktail bar, offering a tight, condescending smile. "It is so brave of you to do this, Paige," she murmured, patting my arm. "Hosting a celebration for children you can never have takes real strength. I do not know how you bear it." I did not flinch. I poured her a glass of sparkling water, handing it over with steady hands. "Thank you, Diane," I replied smoothly. Today is going to be unforgettable for all of us. I promise you that. Just as the caterers began serving the artisan quiches, the doorbell chimed one final time. I opened the heavy oak door to find Jordan standing on the porch. My corporate attorney traded his usual severe courtroom attire for a relaxed navy blazer and khakis blending perfectly into the suburban crowd. He carried a sleek black leather briefcase, gripping the handle with practiced ease. "Thanks for having me, Paige," he said, stepping inside. I turned toward the room, raising my voice just enough to carry over the chatter. "Everyone, this is Jordan, a colleague from the tech firm. He wanted to drop by and show some support." Jordan offered a charming, disarming smile to the crowd. He shook hands with my father and complimented my mother's floral arrangements. No one suspected the polite, handsome man admiring the white roses was holding the legal instrument that would sever Nolan's future. The contrast between the pastel baby shower and the dark legal reality hiding inside that briefcase was a profound thrill. The party shifted into high gear. Kelsey held court in her velvet armchair, basking in the adoration of 40 oblivious guests. Nolan hovered at her elbow, playing the doting uncle, fetching her napkins and laughing at my father's jokes. The room was a symphony of familial warmth and domestic perfection. Pastel balloons bumped gently against the ceiling, the illusion of sisterhood, the facade of a happy marriage, and the lie of their biological legacy all swirled together in a toxic, intoxicating bubble. I stood by the fireplace, watching the performance reach its peak. My pulse was a slow, steady drumbeat in my ears. I surveyed the room, locking eyes with Jordan for a fraction of a second. He gave a microscopic nod. The stage was set. The audience was seated. The cameras were rolling. The trap was primed. All that remained was the execution. The baby shower games concluded with a chorus of polite applause and forced laughter. Guests discarded their tiny golf pencils and printed bingo cards onto the glass coffee table. The atmosphere in the expansive living room shifted toward the main event. It was time for the gift opening. My mother directed the crowd to form a loose semicircle around the velvet armchair where my sister sat. Kelsey adjusted her maternity dress, smoothing the expensive fabric over her swelling stomach. She possessed the radiant entitlement of a monarch preparing to receive tributes from her loyal subjects. The pile of presents beside her rivaled a small mountain wrapped in shimmering silver paper and topped with oversized silk ribbons purchased with my money. Nolan hovered immediately behind her shoulder. He leaned down to hand her a glass of sparkling cider, his fleece vest brushing affectionately against her hair. His eyes swept the room, soaking in the admiration of my relatives. He loved playing the supportive family man. It provided the perfect camouflage for a parasite hiding in plain sight. The guests watched eagerly as Kelsey tore into the first few packages. She opened a designer diaper bag from my aunt, issuing a high-pitched squeal of delight. She unboxed tiny cashmere sweaters and imported wooden toys, offering practiced expressions of gratitude to the aunts and cousins gathered around her. The living room hummed with the collective warmth of domestic celebration. The air smelled of spun sugar and expensive floral arrangements. It was a masterpiece of suburban theater. And I was about to drop the curtain. I moved toward the marble fireplace, picking up the heavy manila envelope I had placed on the mantel earlier that morning. My fingers traced the smooth paper. Inside rested the culmination of my silent war. I picked up my champagne flute and a silver spoon. The crystal chimed a sharp, clear note. The sound sliced through the ambient chatter. Dozens of faces turned in my direction. The murmurs died away, leaving a hushed, expectant silence. My parents looked at me with bright, proud smiles. Diane stood near the doorway, holding a small appetizer plate, expecting me to deliver a tearful speech acknowledging my own barren reality while elevating her son. "Thank you, everyone, for sharing this beautiful afternoon," I began, my voice projecting evenly across the expansive room. Family is the foundation of our lives here in Utah. It shapes our values, it tests our boundaries, and sometimes it delivers unexpected truths that change the trajectory of our future forever. I walked the few short paces to the center of the semicircle, stopping directly in front of the velvet chair. I extended my arm, holding the envelope out to my sister. "Nolan and I wanted to give you something distinct," I said, maintaining direct, piercing eye contact with her. "A joint offering. Something to commemorate the reality of this new chapter in our lives." Kelsey reached out, her eyes gleaming with greedy anticipation. She assumed it was a deed to a property or a substantial financial transfer designed to fund her nursery. She ripped the sealed flap, her manicured nails digging eagerly into the paper. She reached inside and pulled the contents onto her lap. The glossy 8x10 photographs slid across the fabric of her dress. The top image displayed Nolan and Kelsey locked in a desperate embrace on the snowy porch of the Park City rental cabin. Beside the pictures lay the thick, bound transcript detailing every sordid text message they had exchanged over the past year. The color drained from my sister's face, leaving her skin the shade of chalk. Her jaw unhinged. She stared down at the images, her hands trembling so fiercely the papers rattled against each other. From the edge of a crowd, a sharp intake of breath fractured the silence. My mother stood frozen near the mocktail bar. The porcelain plate slipped from her weakened grip. It struck the hardwood floor, shattering into dozens of jagged pieces. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The 12th conflict erupted, detonating the polite facade of the afternoon. Aunts and uncles leaned forward, squinting to make sense of the images scattered across Kelsey's lap. The bold, printed text on the transcript cover page was impossible to miss. Recognition dawned on their faces, followed instantly by visceral horror. Murmurs escalated into shocked gasps. The guests instinctively took a collective step backward, recoiling from the epicenter of the betrayal. Kelsey opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. She scrambled to gather the photos, trying to shove them back into the envelope, but her hands refused to cooperate. The glossy prints slipped through her fingers, tumbling onto the Persian rug for everyone to see. The image of Nolan kissing her neck lay face up next to a highlighted page of text where she plotted to drain my savings. "I cannot," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. "This is a mistake. This is not what it looks like." Behind her, the illusion of the Golden Boy shattered. Nolan's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. Panic flared in his eyes, wild and untamed. The realization that a secret double life was suddenly exposed to his mother, his in-laws, and his peers short-circuited his brain. He defaulted to the only defense mechanism he knew. He tried to weaponize his gaslighting. He stepped around the chair, placing himself between the crowd and the scattered evidence. "Paige is insane!" he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain of his own desperation. His hands sliced through the air, frantic and uncoordinated. "Do not look at those! She fabricated these pictures. She hired someone to edit them. She is sick." The room remained paralyzed. Nolan spun toward my parents, pointing an accusing finger at me. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "You all know how she is," he pleaded, his tone adopting a frantic, whining pitch. "She is obsessed with her job. She is stressed out. She cannot have children, and it broke her mind. She is just jealous that Kelsey is pregnant. She is trying to ruin this beautiful day because she is barren and bitter." I stood perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against his ridiculous accusations. I just watched him dig his own grave in front of the people he had spent years trying to impress. His words sounded hollow, desperate, and pathetic. The text transcripts lay open on the floor, displaying messages written in his unmistakable cadence, detailing his plans to siphon my tech salary. The high-definition photographs left zero room for interpretation. The lighting, the shadows, the physical contact captured by the telephoto lens was undeniably real. My father took a slow, deliberate step toward his son-in-law. His fists were clenched tight at his sides, a dark storm gathering in his eyes. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her cheeks, not out of joy, but out of sheer devastation. Diane stood rooted to the doorway, her jaw slack, staring at the son she had just praised moments earlier. The enabling network Nolan relied upon dissolved into dust before his eyes. He looked around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face. He found nothing but disgust and condemnation. He turned back to me, his chest heaving, his frantic eyes searching for a weakness he could exploit. But he found a wall of ice. I let the silence stretch, allowing the gravity of his public execution to settle over his shoulders. His attempt to label me crazy had failed spectacularly. He thought the social humiliation was the worst consequence he would face today. He did not realize the social humiliation was merely the opening act. The real punishment was sitting quietly in a black leather briefcase across the room, waiting to sever his future. The echo of Nolan's frantic shouting faded into the corners of the expansive living room. He stood, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling as he waited for someone to validate his desperate lies. He scanned the faces of my parents, his mother, and our friends, searching for a single nod of agreement. He found nothing but cold, impenetrable disgust. My father glared at him with a silent fury that seemed to lower the temperature in the room. Diane stared at the floor, unable to look at her own son. Nolan still believed he was fighting a social battle. He thought if he could just convince the crowd I was an unstable, jealous woman, he might salvage a shred of his reputation. He did not realize his reputation was the least of his problems. Before he could open his mouth to launch another pathetic excuse, the crowd parted. Jordan stepped forward from his position near the mocktail bar. My corporate attorney did not rush. He moved with the smooth, predatory grace of a man who spent his career dissecting hostile takeovers and dismantling fraudulent executives. The festive atmosphere of the baby shower clashed starkly with his serious, focused demeanor. He carried his sleek black leather briefcase, setting it down on a side table next to a towering display of artisan cupcakes. The sharp metallic click of the brass latches opening sounded incredibly loud in the hushed room. Jordan reached inside and extracted a slim manila folder. He closed the briefcase and walked directly up to my husband. "You have been served, Nolan," Jordan said. His voice was calm even and devoid of any emotional inflection. It was the voice of inevitable consequence. Nolan blinked, looking from me to the attorney. He reached out and took the folder automatically, his brain struggling to process the sudden shift in dynamics. "What is this?" he scoffed, attempting to inject a tone of arrogant dismissal into his wavering voice. "Another one of your crazy stunts, Paige? Did you hire an actor to play a lawyer?" I stood tall, folding my arms across my chest. I did not speak. I let the paperwork speak for me. "I am a senior partner at Vanguard Legal," Jordan clarified, adjusting his navy blazer. "That is a formal petition for the dissolution of your marriage. It is accompanied by the executed postnuptial agreement you signed last Thursday evening." Nolan laughed, a short, breathless sound of genuine confusion. "That agreement was for her corporate board. It was a restructuring mandate to secure my business investment. You have no idea what you are talking about." "There was no corporate mandate," Jordan replied smoothly. There is no $200,000 investment. I suggest you turn to page 14, section 4. Nolan's eyes darted toward me, searching for a tell. He found only a wall of ice. His hands began to shake as he opened the folder. He flipped past the standard definitions and jurisdictional parameters, the pages rustling loudly in his trembling grip. He reached page 14. "Read the highlighted section," Jordan instructed. Nolan stared at the dense paragraphs. I watched his eyes track back and forth across the legal jargon. He was finally reading the words he had been too greedy to review days earlier. He read the definition of moral turpitude. He read the specific clauses detailing infidelity, deceit, and the dissipation of marital assets. Then he reached the forfeiture penalty. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly grayish white. His jaw went slack. The illusion of his impending wealth shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "As per the terms you willingly signed and dated," Jordan continued, his voice carrying across the silent living room, "you have waived your right to contest the divorce. You have forfeited all claims to the marital estate. That includes any demand for spousal support. It includes the equity in this suburban property. It includes the luxury vehicle parked in the driveway. It includes all tech stock options and retirement accounts held in your wife's name. You are entitled to the clothing on your back and the personal debts you accrued in your failing consulting business. Nothing more." The folder slipped from Nolan's fingers. It hit the Persian rug, landing right next to the glossy photographs of his profound betrayal. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new, unfamiliar kind of terror. The towering arrogance that defined his entire personality evaporated. He was a man, watching his entire future burn to ash. For 8 years, he had treated me like a disposable asset, while enjoying the luxury my labor provided. He thought he could secure a massive payout and walk away to build a fantasy life with my sister. Instead, he had signed a legally binding contract that left him entirely destitute. But a narcissist never truly accepts defeat without searching for a lifeline. His ego refused to die completely. He needed to salvage some fragment of his pride in front of the stunned audience. He swallowed hard, squaring his shoulders in a pathetic attempt to project strength. He turned his back on me and faced Kelsey. She was still shivering in her velvet armchair, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and undeniable evidence. "It is fine," Nolan said, his voice trembling but laced with forced defiance. He reached out, grabbing her hand. "We do not need her money, Kelsey. We have each other. I am going to be a father to these twins. We have our own family now. We will build our own life, far away from her toxicity." He looked around the room, jutting his chin out, trying to find dignity in his newly declared poverty. He expected his grand romantic gesture to earn a sliver of sympathy. He expected the woman carrying the children he thought were his to stand up and embrace him. He fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had chosen. Kelsey had never worked a difficult day in her life. She relied on my financial bailouts to maintain her curated lifestyle. She chose Nolan because he was handsome, accessible, and most importantly, tied to my substantial wealth. She assumed he would secure a lucrative divorce settlement. She envisioned the future funded by my alimony payments. Now she was looking at a broke, unemployed consultant saddled with credit card debt and zero prospects. The romantic fantasy evaporated, instantly replaced by cold, hard, economic reality. She stared at the hand holding hers as if it were a venomous snake. She ripped her fingers away, pulling her arm tight against her chest. She shrank back into the depths of the armchair, pressing her spine against the velvet upholstery, trying to put as much physical distance between them as possible. "Nolan," she whispered, her voice laced with unfiltered horror. "You have nothing. The alliance fractured in real time. Nolan looked at her, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He expected a partner in crime ready to brave the storm together. He found a parasite, realizing her host was deceased. The silence in the room shifted from shocked outrage to profound, pathetic pity. They were turning on each other before the dust even settled. I stepped forward. The crowd instinctively parted, allowing me to walk directly up to the velvet chair. Kelsey looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her flawless makeup. Her eyes begged silently for the older sister who always fixed her mistakes, who always paid her debts, who always shielded her from consequences. I offered zero comfort. My gaze dropped from her weeping eyes to her collarbone. The vintage diamond pendant sparkled under the recessed ceiling lights, mocking the sacred history it represented. I reached out. My fingers brushed against the warm skin of her neck. She froze, terrified to move, her breath hitching in her throat. I slid my hand to the nape of her neck, locating the delicate platinum clasp. With a swift, practiced motion, I pressed the mechanism and unhooked it. The chain slid smoothly off her skin. The heavy teardrop diamond fell into my open palm. I closed my fist around my grandmother's heirloom, feeling the cold edges of the stone pressing into my skin. I lowered my hand and dropped the necklace into the pocket of my blazer. "That belongs to my family," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of an anvil. "And you are no longer part of it." I took a deliberate step back, surveying the wreckage I had orchestrated. Kelsey sobbed into her hands, entirely alone in a room full of people. Nolan stood paralyzed, staring at the floor, realizing the woman he blew up his marriage for was disgusted by his poverty. They were both stripped bare, exposed, and ruined. But the trap was not finished closing. The social execution was complete, and the financial severing was legally binding. Now it was time to remove the infection from my property. I turned my attention back to my former husband, ready to deliver the final instruction that would push him out into the cold. The heavy silence in the living room felt thick enough to choke on. The festive sage and blush balloons bobbing against the ceiling now looked like grotesque decorations at a crime scene. The catered artisan pastries sat untouched on silver platters, the sweet scent of spun sugar turning rancid in the stifling air. Guests were already shuffling toward the exits. Aunts and uncles averted their eyes, grabbing their coats from the hall closet with frantic, hushed urgency. No one wanted to breathe the same air as the two people weeping in the center of the Persian rug. I turned my attention to Jordan. My attorney gave a curt nod, reaching into his black leather briefcase one final time. He produced a crisp, single-page document. He did not hand it to Nolan. Instead, he dropped it onto the glass coffee table right beside a stack of pristine, unused baby shower games. "That is a court-ordered mandate," Jordan stated, his voice slicing through the ambient whimpering. "It is an exclusive occupancy injunction. A judge signed it this morning, based on the documented financial fraud and asset dissipation included in the primary filing. It grants my client sole use and possession of this residence effective immediately." Nolan stared at the paper as if it were a venomous insect. His chest heaved under his designer fleece vest. "You cannot do this," he stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "This is my home. You cannot just throw me out on the street." "It is my property," I corrected, keeping my tone flat and devoid of any lingering warmth. "And I am not throwing you out on the street. You have exactly 1 hour to pack a single duffel bag. Take your clothes and your climbing gear. Leave the electronics I purchased. If you are still standing inside these walls when 60 minutes expire, Jordan will call the local precinct and have you escorted off the premises in handcuffs for trespassing." Nolan stepped backward, his heel catching on the edge of the rug. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and frantic, searching for an ally. He found my parents standing near the marble fireplace. My father stood with his shoulders squared, his posture rigid. The welcoming, jovial patriarch who had roasted brisket for this man just weeks ago was gone. In his place stood a man hollowed out by grief and betrayal. My mother leaned against him, her face buried in a linen handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with silent, agonizing sobs. Kelsey saw them too. Stripped of her vintage diamond necklace and her future meal ticket, my sister collapsed inward. She pushed herself up from the velvet armchair, her hands clutching her pregnant stomach. She stumbled toward our parents, her expensive maternity dress tangling around her ankles. "Mom," she pleaded, her voice a ragged, breathless rasp. "Mom, please, you have to understand. I was scared. I did not know what to do. Please do not look at me like that." She reached her hand out, desperate for the maternal comfort she had exploited her entire life. My father intercepted her. He stepped in front of my mother, forming a physical barrier between his weeping wife and his youngest daughter. He did not raise his voice. He did not yell. The quiet devastation in his tone was far more lethal than anger. "Do not touch her," my father said. Kelsey flinched, pulling her hand back as if she had been burned. "Dad," she whimpered, "we gave you everything." He continued, his eyes locked on her with a chilling, unfamiliar distance. "We supported you. Your sister carried you. She financed your life. She opened her home to you. And you brought this rot into our family. You sat at our dinner table and smiled at her while you plotted to steal her husband and her future." "It was a mistake," Kelsey sobbed, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. "It was a sustained campaign of deceit," my father corrected coldly. "You have 1 hour to leave this house. Do not call us tonight. Do not come to our home. We have nothing left to say to you." He turned his back on her. He wrapped his arm around my mother, guiding her gently toward the front door. They walked out of the house without casting a single backward glance at the daughter who had fractured our family tree. Kelsey crumpled to her knees right there on the hardwood floor. She buried her face in her hands, the sound of her wailing echoing off the high ceilings. She was entirely alone. I did not stay to watch them scramble. The trap had sprung, the execution was finalized, and the air inside the house felt suffocating. I walked toward the front hallway, the vintage diamond pendant resting heavy and secure in the pocket of my blazer. I reached into the hall closet and retrieved my tailored wool trench coat. I slipped it over my shoulders, adjusting the lapels with steady, precise movements. Footsteps pounded against the hardwood behind me. "Paige, wait!" Nolan rushed into the foyer. His face was a mask of sheer panic. The golden boy facade had melted away, leaving a terrified, hollow shell of a man. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the physical boundary the legal paperwork had just established, but his eyes begged for a reprieve. "You cannot just walk away like this," he pleaded, his breathing ragged. "We have 8 years together. 8 years! You are acting like a machine. You are destroying the family over a mistake." I paused with my hand resting on the brushed brass handle of the front door. I turned my head, slowly meeting his frantic, bloodshot eyes. The sheer audacity required to cast himself as the victim in the final hour was remarkable. "I did not destroy the family, Nolan," I said, every syllable crisp and deliberately measured. "You did. You took our vows, you took my money, and you placed them in the hands of a woman who only wanted you because I was funding you." He opened his mouth to argue, to spin one last web of therapy speak, but I cut him off. "You thought you were a mastermind," I continued, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal whisper. You thought you could blindfold me with my own grief. You thought you could orchestrate a double life right under my roof because you assumed I was too damaged to notice. But you are not a mastermind, and you are not nearly as smart as you think you are. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The crisp, freezing mountain air washed over my face, smelling of pine needles and impending snow. It was the cleanest thing I had inhaled all day. I stepped out onto the porch. Jordan was already waiting at the bottom of the brick steps. A black town car idled in the driveway, its engine humming a low, steady rhythm. The driver stood by the rear passenger door, holding it open for me. I walked down the steps, the heels of my boots clicking sharply against the pavement. I did not look back at the open doorway. I did not look back at the man standing in the foyer, staring at the ruins of the life he had so carelessly discarded. I slid into the luxurious leather interior of the town car. Jordan climbed in the opposite side, snapping his briefcase shut. The driver closed my door, sealing me inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin. The vehicle shifted into gear, pulling smoothly out of the driveway and onto the quiet suburban street. I leaned my head back against the headrest, looking out the tinted window. I watched the sprawling, beautiful house I had purchased shrink in the rearview mirror. The pristine landscaping, the large bay windows, the picturesque facade. It was no longer my prison. It was the tomb where I had buried my dead marriage. For the first time in 8 years, the crushing weight in my chest evaporated. I felt entirely light. The burden of subsidizing a parasite, the agony of forced infertility treatments, the suffocating expectations of my culture, all of it lifted, leaving behind a profound, unshakable peace. I had won. But as the town car merged onto the highway, heading toward the sleek, modern skyline of downtown Salt Lake City, I knew the fallout was far from over. Nolan had 60 minutes to pack his duffel bag and vacate the premises. Stripped of his assets, his vehicle, and his reputation, he had only one place left to go. He would drive his aging truck straight to Diane's house. He would run to his enabling mother, seeking comfort and validation, eager to cry on her shoulder and boast about the legacy he was building with his unborn twins. He was driving right into the final invisible landmine I had uncovered in his medical files. He was carrying a secret he did not even know he possessed, racing toward a conversation that would fracture his mind forever. The harsh glare of the sodium streetlights illuminated the interior of Nolan's aging pickup truck. The heater blasted hot, dry air against his face, but he could not stop shivering. The engine roared as he accelerated onto the interstate, pushing the speedometer past 80. The pristine suburban house he had called home for 8 years was gone. The tech equity he felt entitled to was legally barricaded. The luxury lifestyle funded by my corporate salary had vanished into thin air. He gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. His duffel bag lay tossed haphazardly on the passenger seat, containing a few changes of clothes and a pair of hiking boots. It was a pathetic, meager sum for nearly a decade of marriage. His mind raced, cycling through rapid, frantic justifications. He needed to spin the narrative before the reality of his poverty set in. He needed an ally. He needed someone who would look at the wreckage and still tell him he was the victim. He drove straight to the affluent, gated community where his mother resided. Diane lived in a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa, a testament to her late husband's lucrative career in real estate development. She had always been Nolan's ultimate safety net. Whenever he failed out of college, dropped a career path, or accumulated credit card debt, Diane was there to smooth over the rough edges and write a check. He bypassed the intercom, punching the security code directly into the keypad. The heavy iron gates swung open. Nolan slammed the truck into park outside her front door, barely waiting for the engine to die before he sprinted up the brick walkway. He hammered his fist against the heavy mahogany door. The sound echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac. A moment later, the deadbolt clicked. Diane opened the door, wearing a silk robe. Her face was pale, the skin tight and drawn around her eyes. She had fled the baby shower the moment the photographs dropped, unable to witness the public destruction of her golden boy. "Mom," he gasped, pushing past her into the spacious marble foyer. Diane closed the door, leaning heavily against the wood. "Nolan," she breathed, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "I need a place to stay," he said, pacing the length of the entryway. His boots squeaked against the polished stone. Paige went crazy. She actually lost her mind. She hired a lawyer and ambushed me in front of everyone. She forced me out of my own house. He ran a hand through his hair, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. The delusion was so deeply ingrained in his psyche, he was struggling to separate his lies from reality. He genuinely expected his mother to pull him into an embrace and validate his outrage. "She set a trap," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceiling. "She has been plotting this for weeks." She drafted a post-nuptial agreement under the guise of a corporate mandate and buried a forfeiture clause in it. "She took everything, Mom." Diane did not move. She remained pressed against the door, her arms wrapped tightly around her torso. "You signed it?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I did not know what it was," he lied, effortlessly deflecting the blame for his own greed. "She manipulated me. She played on my trust." He stopped pacing, turning to face her. His chest heaved as he launched into his final desperate defense mechanism, the ultimate justification for his betrayal. "She did this because she is jealous, Mom," he insisted, pointing a finger toward the ceiling as if testifying before a judge. "You saw her at the shower. She is barren. She cannot have children, and it broke her brain. She could not stand watching me build a family with someone else." He walked into the adjoining kitchen, the heels of his boots echoing on the Spanish tile. He leaned against the granite island, gripping the edge to steady his shaking hands. "Kelsey is having my twins," he declared, a manic, triumphant gleam returning to his bloodshot eyes. "I am finally going to be a father. I am going to build a real family. Paige is just a bitter, empty corporate drone trying to punish me for my fertility." Diane stood frozen near the kitchen entrance. She reached out with a trembling hand, grasping the back of a mahogany dining chair for support. She slowly lowered herself into the seat, the silk fabric of her robe rustling against the wood. The color vanished from her cheeks, leaving her skin a translucent gray. She stared at her son, her eyes wide with a horrifying, profound realization. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, thick with decades of unspoken secrets. "Nolan," she interrupted, her voice a fragile, terrified whisper. He stopped mid-rant, looking at her expectantly, waiting for the maternal validation he craved. "Yeah, Mom, what is it?" "We need to call a lawyer. We need to fight that injunction." Diane covered her mouth with both hands, a choked sob escaping her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears spilling hot and fast down her pale face. "Wait," she breathed, her voice cracking under the weight of the impending devastation. "She did not tell you." Nolan frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "Tell me what?" The silence in the kitchen stretched until it threatened to snap. Diane lowered her hands, resting them flat against the dining table. Her fingers trembled so fiercely they rattled against the polished wood. "The doctors told me she choked out the words, tearing from her throat like shards of glass. After the mumps, when you were 18. Nolan's face went blank. The manic energy drained from his posture, leaving him perfectly still. "What are you talking about?" It was a severe complication. Diane sobbed, shaking her head frantically. "The infection spread. The fever was too high, for too long. The specialist explained the prognosis to me while you were recovering in the hospital room." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for a forgiveness she would never receive. "You were completely sterile, Nolan," she confessed, the horrific truth ringing through the quiet kitchen. "The tissue damage was permanent and irreversible." The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his spine colliding heavily against the granite island. He reached a hand back, gripping the stone edge to keep his legs from buckling. "No," he stammered, his voice a low, guttural rasp. "No, that is impossible. Paige and I went to the fertility clinic. The doctors said it was unexplained. They said it was her stress. They were protecting your privacy." Diane wept, burying her face in her hands. "The specialist at the hospital told me you refused to return for the final follow-up testing. You were so devastated by the initial warning, you just blocked it out. You refused to talk about it. You acted like it never happened. And I thought maybe it was a misdiagnosis. I did not want to crush your spirit." Nolan stared at the ceiling, his mind fracturing in real time. The hidden insurance claim I had discovered, the formal semen analysis report locking in my filing cabinet. It all validated the confession spilling from his weeping mother. He had secretly visited the clinic 3 years ago, confirming his own biological failure. He had buried the truth, weaponizing my career to shield his fragile ego from reality. He had spent 8 years gaslighting me into believing I was broken. But the medical science staring him in the face now offered a consequence far more terrifying than his wounded pride. If he was 100% sterile, lacking the physical capability to produce a single viable cell, then the woman he had destroyed his marriage for was running a con of her own. The realization bloomed in his chest, a dark, brilliant flower of absolute horror. Kelsey was not carrying his legacy. Kelsey was using him as a financial shield to cover another man's mistake. The luxury lifestyle he threw away, the tech equity he surrendered, the public humiliation he endured. It was all for a biological impossibility. He had signed away his entire future for a pair of twins that did not belong to him. He had orchestrated his own total and absolute ruin. Nolan collapsed onto the kitchen floor, his knees slamming into the hard Spanish tile. He wrapped his arms around his torso, curling inward as a primal, agonizing scream ripped from his throat. It was the sound of a man watching his entire reality disintegrate into ash. His mother wept beside him, unable to offer any comfort for the devastation she had helped create. The trap was fully sprung. The biological nuclear bomb had detonated exactly on schedule. Nolan was finally forced to look at the wreckage of his life without the protective shield of my money or his own delusions. But while he writhed on the kitchen floor, the other half of the parasitic alliance was about to face her own reckoning. Kelsey was cornered, stripped of her financial safety net, and forced to answer for the fraudulent paternity she had spun. The quiet inside my temporary luxury hotel suite was profound. It was a deep, resonant silence that I had not experienced in nearly a decade. I sat on a plush velvet sofa overlooking the sparkling grid of downtown Salt Lake City. A glass of vintage sparkling water rested on the glass table in front of me. I did not feel the need to celebrate with alcohol. My mind was sharp, clear, and perfectly calibrated. I was untouchable. My phone chimed softly from the cushion beside me. The screen illuminated the dark fabric, displaying a notification for a new voicemail from a restricted number. Nolan had been blocked across every communication platform I owned, but a desperate man always finds a way to leave a message. I picked up the device, tapped the screen, and placed the phone on the glass table, activating the speaker. The audio began with a sharp, ragged inhalation. The sound of a man drowning in his own ruin filled my pristine suite. "Paige, please do not delete this," Nolan begged. His voice was a raw, guttural rasp, entirely devoid of the smug confidence that used to define him. "I know you hate me. I know I deserve it, but you have to listen to me. She played us both. Kelsey played us both." I leaned back into the sofa, crossing my legs. I did not feel a shred of pity. I only felt a clinical fascination watching the final gears of my trap grind my enemies into dust. Nolan spent the next 3 minutes of the voicemail recounting the horrific revelation inside his mother's kitchen. He detailed the moment Diane confessed his medical history, confirming the permanent tissue damage from his childhood illness. He described his knees hitting the Spanish tile, the physical sensation of his entire reality collapsing under the weight of a biological impossibility. He learned he was entirely sterile. He realized the legacy he threw his life away for was a fabricated illusion. And then Nolan explained what happened next. He told me how he dragged himself off his mother's floor, his vision blurred with tears and rage, and dialed Kelsey's number. She answered on the 4th ring. She was sitting in the parking lot of a cheap motel, shivering in her cashmere coat, having been formally exiled from our parents' home. She expected Nolan to offer a plan, a financial rescue, a promise that they would survive the scandal. Instead, he delivered a death blow to her charade. "Are they mine?" Nolan demanded, his voice echoing through the phone speaker as he recounted the confrontation. He told me how the line went dead silent. Kelsey tried to play the victim, asking what he was talking about, accusing him of losing his nerve. "I know about the mumps," Nolan screamed into his phone, repeating the dialogue for my benefit. "I know I am sterile. My mother told me everything. So I am going to ask you one last time. Who is the father?" Through the voicemail, Nolan described the exact moment Kelsey's house of cards collapsed. Cornered, stripped of my financial shield, and facing a man who held undeniable medical proof, she broke. The truth spilled out of her in a frantic, ugly torrent. The real father was a man named Wyatt. He was a wealthy software developer from California who owned a vacation property in Park City. Kelsey had met him at a high-end lounge during one of the weekends I thought she was running errands for our mother. They engaged in a brief, careless fling. Kelsey saw Wyatt as her golden ticket, a man who could provide the luxurious lifestyle she felt entitled to without requiring her to work. But Wyatt was a man who understood liability. The moment Kelsey announced she was pregnant with twins, he severed all contact. He changed his phone number, blocked her on social media, and instructed his legal team to send her a formal cease and desist letter. He wanted nothing to do with her or the children. Kelsey was stranded. She was pregnant, broke, and accustomed to a standard of living she could not afford. She needed a savior. She needed a host. She looked at her older sister. She saw my wealth, my demanding career, and my desperate, failing attempts to start a family. More importantly, she saw my husband. She saw a man crippled by insecurity, a man who desperately wanted to prove his virility and escape the shadow of his successful wife. She knew Nolan was gullible. She knew he was a parasite looking for an easier ride. Kelsey seduced him with calculated precision. She fed his ego, playing the soft, nurturing alternative to my rigid corporate persona. She convinced him the twins were the result of their undeniable organic connection. She manipulated him into draining my business accounts to fund their weekend getaways, securing her own comfort while pinning another man's children on him. Listening to Nolan recount this confession, a cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. The irony was exquisite. Kelsey tried to trap a tech fortune, failed spectacularly, and decided to settle for a man who merely leached off a tech fortune. Nolan wept into the receiver as he reached the climax of their argument. He told me how he demanded she apologize, how he screamed that she ruined his life. But Kelsey did not apologize. Without my bank accounts to smooth out his flaws, Nolan's appeal vanished instantly. "You ruined your own life," Kelsey snapped at him, her voice turning vicious and cruel. "You are a broke, unemployed loser who lives off his wife. Wyatt is 10 times the man you are. You were just a convenient wallet, Nolan. And now that Paige cut you off, you are entirely useless to me. Do not ever call me again." The organic connection they had boasted about in their secret text messages combusted the second the funding dried up. They were two parasites fighting over a dead host, turning on each other with a venomous, bitter hatred. Nolan's voicemail ended with a pathetic, whimpering plea for forgiveness. He begged me to reconsider the postnuptial agreement, claiming he was the victim of a sophisticated fraud. He swore he still loved me. I reached out and tapped the delete button. The audio vanished, erased from the digital world forever. A moment later, my phone vibrated with a new text message. It was from my father. Since the explosion at the baby shower, my parents had moved with swift, unyielding resolve. My father was a man of traditional principles, and Kelsey had violated the core tenets of our family. The text message was brief, factual, and devoid of any parental warmth. "We canceled Kelsey's supplementary credit cards," my father wrote. "I instructed the bank to freeze the small trust account your grandmother left her. She showed up at the house an hour ago demanding entry. I told her through the security intercom that she is no longer welcome on this property. She threatened to call the police. I told her to go ahead. She eventually drove away. We are changing the locks tomorrow. I am so sorry for everything, Paige. We love you." I read the message twice, feeling a profound sense of closure settle over my shoulders. I did not have to file a restraining order against my sister. I did not have to engage in a messy public screaming match in a courtroom to prove her deceit. I did not have to spend months agonizing over how to punish them for the trauma they inflicted upon me. The trap I built was now fully autonomous. By strategically exposing the truth and cutting the financial tether, I set off a chain reaction that required zero ongoing effort on my part. Nolan was trapped in a prison of his own biological reality, grieving a legacy that never existed, mourning a wealth he signed away out of sheer greed. Kelsey was exiled from her family, cut off from her funding, and left to face a high-risk twin pregnancy entirely alone, despised by the very man she tried to manipulate. They were locked in a cycle of mutual destruction, blaming each other for the ashes of their respective lives. I did not have to lift a single finger to hurt them. Their own selfish choices were executing the punishment with a flawless, terrifying efficiency. I stood up from the velvet sofa and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights below twinkled like scattered diamonds against the dark pavement. The air inside my suite was cool and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of fresh linens and possibility. The war was over. The battlefield was cleared. I had navigated the treacherous landscape of their betrayal without compromising my dignity, my career, or my heritage. I was emerging from the wreckage stronger, sharper, and unburdened by the dead weight I had carried for 8 long years. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into my corporate office and finalize the operational merger that would secure my promotion. I would review real estate listings for a new penthouse condo. I would begin the next chapter of my life, on my own terms, funded by my own brilliance, answering to no one but myself. The horizon stretching out before me was vast and undeniably mine. The heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom swung shut, sealing me inside a quiet sanctuary of brushed steel and panoramic glass. 8 months had passed since the afternoon my former life fractured into 1,000 jagged pieces on a Persian rug. I sat at the head of a sprawling mahogany conference table holding a silver fountain pen. The operational merger I had spent the last 3 quarters negotiating was finally condensed into a stack of binding contracts resting precisely in front of me. I did not hesitate. I pressed the nib to the thick paper, tracing my signature with fluid, deliberate strokes. The ink dried instantly, securing a corporate acquisition that would permanently redefine the Silicon Slopes tech sector. The board of directors seated around the table offered a unified round of applause. My promotion to Chief Operating Officer was no longer a speculative milestone. It was a finalized reality. Free from the exhausting financial and emotional anchor of a parasitic marriage, my ambition operated without friction. I no longer spent my evenings auditing credit card statements or enduring patronizing lectures about the toxic nature of my career. My energy belonged entirely to me. I channeled the meticulous discipline required to orchestrate a personal reckoning directly into my professional ascent. The results were undeniable. Later that evening, I drove my car into the secured underground garage of a sleek, high-rise building in downtown Salt Lake City. I bypassed the sprawling suburban neighborhoods entirely. The manicured lawns, the competitive homeowner associations, and the suffocating pressure of performing domestic perfection were artifacts of a closed chapter. The private elevator deposited me directly into my new penthouse. The aesthetic was a sharp, intentional departure from the cozy pastel confines of my previous home. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering grid of the city below, offering a sweeping vantage point of the valley. The interior featured polished concrete floors, minimalist leather furniture, and striking monochrome artwork. It was a space designed for a woman who required zero validation from her surroundings. I walked into the kitchen, pouring a measure of sparkling water into a crystal tumbler. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop, displaying a brief notification from Jordan. My attorney remained a constant, efficient presence in the aftermath of the fallout. The legal proceedings regarding the dissolution of my marriage had concluded that morning, with zero fanfare and zero concessions. The postnuptial agreement held up flawlessly against the desperate, frantic challenges Nolan's court-appointed lawyer attempted to mount. The moral turpitude clause operated exactly as Jordan designed, acting as an impenetrable shield around my assets. Nolan walked away with nothing but a duffel bag and a staggering mountain of personal debt from his imaginary consulting firm. According to the final summary report resting in my inbox, Nolan currently resided in a cramped studio apartment near the industrial district. To satisfy his creditors, he took a minimum wage position stocking shelves at a local sporting goods store. The man who once mocked my corporate grind now spent his days organizing hiking boots and climbing harnesses for customers who were actually living the outdoor adventures he used to fake. Kelsey's reality was equally grim. My parents held firm to their boundary, refusing to subsidize her deception. Stripped of my wealth and abandoned by the men she tried to manipulate, she moved into a small duplex on the outskirts of the valley. The twins arrived in late autumn, demanding a relentless, exhausting toll on her physical and financial resources. The organic connection she once romanticized with my ex-husband dissolved into bitter silence. They did not speak. They did not collaborate. They merely existed in their separate, isolated prisons, bound together only by the shared memory of the trap they willingly walked into. I tapped the screen of my phone, deleting Jordan's summary report. I did not feel a spark of vindictive joy reading about their misery. I felt nothing at all. They were strangers, playing out the consequences of their own choices. My focus was reserved entirely for the horizon ahead. December arrived, blanketing the Wasatch Mountains in a thick layer of pristine, powdery snow. The holiday season brought a familiar chill to the air, but this year it carried zero dread. I was not hosting family dinners or smiling through passive-aggressive microaggressions. I was attending the annual Winter Charity Gala in Park City. The location offered a quiet, poetic symmetry. The same mountain town where Nolan and Kelsey hid their affair now served as the backdrop for my victory lap. The ballroom of the luxury lodge hummed with the sophisticated chatter of tech founders, investors, and local politicians. A string quartet played a bright, elegant melody in the corner. Waiters navigated the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne and miniature culinary creations. The scent of pine needles and expensive perfume mingled in the warm, ambient heat. I wore a tailored midnight blue gown that brushed gracefully against the polished wooden floorboards. The fabric caught the ambient light, shimmering like the deep waters of a high mountain lake. Resting securely against my collarbone was my grandmother's vintage diamond pendant. The platinum chain felt cool and familiar, a reclaimed piece of my heritage sitting exactly where it belonged. I moved through the room exchanging pleasantries with industry peers, accepting congratulations on the recent merger. I navigated the social current with effortless grace, secure in the knowledge that I belonged in this room based on my own merit. I was not an accessory to a husband's ambition. I was the architect of my own empire. Near the center of the ballroom, I spotted a familiar figure standing by a towering ice sculpture. Jordan wore a sharp charcoal tuxedo, his demeanor relaxed yet inherently observant. He caught my eye across the sea of formal wear. We did not need to cross the room to exchange idle conversation. He simply raised his crystal glass, tipping it slightly in my direction. It was a silent salute, an acknowledgement of a battle fought and won in the shadows. I offered a microscopic nod in return, raising my own glass to seal the unspoken victory. The ambient heat of the crowded ballroom grew slightly overwhelming. I navigated toward the grand French doors lining the far wall, pushing one open and stepping out onto the expansive wraparound balcony. The frigid mountain air hit my skin, delivering a sharp, invigorating jolt to my senses. The sky above was a vast canvas of inky black, sprinkled with thousands of bright, piercing stars. The snow-capped peaks of the surrounding mountains glowed faintly in the moonlight, projecting a silent, enduring strength. I rested my hands on the cold stone balustrade, looking out over the frozen landscape. The journey from that initial devastating family dinner to this moment of profound tranquility felt like navigating a treacherous canyon in the dark. People often assume that revenge requires screaming matches, broken dishes, and chaotic public spectacles. They believe retribution must be loud to be effective. But true power does not roar. True power operates in the quiet, meticulous details. The greatest trap I ever set required zero physical force and zero emotional outbursts. It only required the discipline to let the liars believe they were winning. I gave them enough rope to build their own gallows, and then I simply stepped back and watched the gravity of their own greed do the rest. I took one final deep breath, filling my lungs with the pure, thin air of the high elevation. I exhaled a soft plume of white mist, watching it dissipate into the night. My chest felt clear, my conscience unburdened. I turned away from the freezing dark, pulling the heavy wooden door open and stepping back into the radiant, golden warmth of the party. There is a specific idyllic image of the traditional American family that we are conditioned to revere from the time we are children. We are taught to envision the sprawling suburban home, the matching holiday outfits, the manicured lawns, and the unshakable loyalty that supposedly binds blood and marriage together. We are told that family is our ultimate safety net, the one place where we are guaranteed unconditional love and protection. But the story of Paige Nolan and Kelsey serves as a chilling, profound cautionary tale. It peels back the pastel wallpaper of the suburban dream to ask a devastating question. What happens when the safety net is woven entirely out of deception? When we look closely at the wreckage of this family, the most vital lessons do not center on the mechanics of a postnuptial agreement or the shock of a baby shower reveal. The true lessons lie in the quiet, insidious failures of parenting, the distortion of family responsibility, and the catastrophic consequences of raising children without emotional accountability. Consider Nolan's mother, Diane. Parenting does not magically cease when a child turns 18. Diane raised a boy who believed his worth was intrinsically tied to a superficial legacy, a boy so terrified of his own biological reality that he chose to live a catastrophic lie rather than face his own inadequacy. When the doctors told Diane about her son's sterility, she chose to protect his fragile ego instead of guiding him toward difficult emotional acceptance. This is the profound danger of raising children without emotional awareness. When we shield our children from the discomfort of their own flaws, we do not make them strong. We make them incredibly fragile. We create adults who will burn down someone else's life, even the life of a devoted spouse, just to keep themselves warm. True long-term guidance requires parents to hold a mirror up to their children, teaching them that their character is forged not in their perfection, but in how honestly they handle their brokenness. Similarly, we must examine Kelsey's towering entitlement. For years, Paige acted as a surrogate parent to her younger sister, constantly bailing her out of debt and funding her lifestyle. This dynamic reflects a tragic distortion of family responsibility. In American culture, we often confuse financial provision with love and enablement with support. We mistakenly believe that giving our children or siblings everything they ask for is a measure of our devotion. But true parenting requires the agonizing, heartbreaking work of letting a child fall. Fairness is not about providing a safety net for every reckless jump. It is about demanding that they earn their own stability. By constantly softening the blow for Kelsey, her family inadvertently raised a predator. They raised a woman who believed that other people's resources, other people's homes, and even other people's husbands were simply hers for the taking. We place a staggering amount of weight on the aesthetics of the traditional family structure. We applaud the outward appearance of stability, the Sunday barbecues, the pristine nurseries, the successful careers. Nolan and Kelsey attempted to build a traditional family on a foundation of profound deceit, weaponizing the modern language of therapy and organic connection to mask their parasitic greed. But a structure is only as strong as its foundation, and honesty is the only concrete that endures. As parents, mentors, and guides to the next generation, we must actively teach children to value the uncomfortable truth over the beautiful lie. We must demonstrate that a family built on silent suffering and hidden betrayals is not a family at all. It is a hostage situation, dressed up in holiday attire. Emotional awareness is the ultimate armor we can provide to the next generation. Paige survived the psychological warfare waged against her because she refused to let gaslighting cloud her reality. She trusted her intuition when the world told her to ignore it. Far too often, we teach children, especially young girls, to be the bigger person, to keep the peace, or to compromise their own boundaries for the sake of family harmony. We are inadvertently training them to be victims. Instead, we must raise them to observe, to document, and to protect their peace with fierce, unapologetic boundaries. We must teach them that true fairness sometimes looks like letting guilty people face the absolute maximum penalty for their actions. Stories like this resonate so deeply because they hold up a mirror to the quiet, desperate compromises we are all asked to make in our own lives. We all know a Diane who enables bad behavior. We all know a Nolan who hides behind a charming facade. We all know a Kelsey who takes without asking. Perhaps in our weaker moments, we have even seen flashes of them in ourselves. If this reflection struck a chord with you, if you find yourself captivated by the intricate, often dark tapestry of family dynamics and the quiet power of reclaiming your own narrative, I encourage you to follow Sarah Told Stories. Join our community as we continue to explore the depths of human behavior, the unavoidable consequences of our choices, and the profound, terrifying strength it takes to walk away from the lies we are commanded to love. When we look back at the ashes of Paige's marriage, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality about how we view family. Conventional wisdom dictates that family is paramount. We recite phrases like, "blood is thicker than water," as if they are sacred vows. We are conditioned to believe that the ultimate act of love is unconditional forgiveness, and that a broken family is a tragedy that must be avoided at all absolute costs. But perhaps this is the greatest, most toxic lie we pass down to our children. Sometimes the most profound act of family preservation is destruction. To save the sanctity of what a true family is supposed to represent, you must be entirely willing to burn down the counterfeit one. The ultimate failure in parenting and family building is not a broken home. It is an intact home built on a foundation of silent, suffocating suffering. True loyalty does not mean offering yourself up as collateral damage for someone else's ego. When the smoke finally clears and you are standing alone in the freezing air, looking back at the life you just dismantled, you have to ask yourself a terrifying question. Were you ever really protecting your family by keeping the peace? Or were you just standing guard for the monsters hiding in your own house?